All right, welcome everyone to this joint session of, what have we got? It's a data lab workshop, it's map time, and it's UC Love Data Week. So if you're here for one of those, welcome. If you're not here for one of those, hang out and learn something with us anyway. So we're gonna be talking about building portfolios today. My name is Michele Tobias. I am the geospatial data specialist at UC Davis Data Lab, and I am here with Pamela Reynolds, who I think has more things to say about what we do at Data Lab.
Yeah, I'm the associate director at the Davis Data Lab, and I'm going to be emceeing the workshop today, helping out with questions in the chat. We also have some other wonderful helpers here from across the MapTime UC Davis community. Helpers, please go ahead and comment in the chat so people can give you a thank you for coming today. And just for those of you who aren't familiar with Data Lab, my quick spiel is that we are a program that's funded by the UC Davis Provost, and we're supported by the library to facilitate the application of data science methods, technologies, and best practices to enhance research and learning in all domains across our university. And it's been wonderful to participate in UC Love Data Week. This is our third iteration here now. And we've really grown in our offerings. And this workshop today arose out of some of the conversations that we've had across all the different UC units and thinking about how to best prepare our data science community, individuals, researchers who are working with data scientists, computer science statisticians, but also all of you in various domains, including the geospatial sciences. And what we've noticed is when people are going out to apply for technical jobs, there's some confusion as to how to structure their application and their resume. And for me, on the hiring end, when I receive a CV or resume that talks about technical skills, it's often hard to be able to assess what that person knows. So if you list on your CV, proficient in R, I don't really know what that means. Or maybe you give yourself 5 stars in Python on your resume. That's a self-assessment that you're making, but it's not showing me what you can do in R or in Python. And so this workshop today really comes full circle to address that point. How can you show the skills that you have to an employer, to somebody who might be funding your grant, to show that you actually have those skills, technical and others, that qualify you for the specific opportunity that you're going after. So I'm very grateful to Michele for stepping up and putting this workshop together today. And why don't you go ahead and dive in?
All right, thanks, Pamela. If I seem a little flustered, it's because I just lost my second screen, which just turned into yellow stripes. So I'm just a little mental switch here. So bear with me while I do that. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we will get started here. Don't need to see all of that stuff. So everything I had stashed on my other screen is now probably going to get in the way today, but that's okay. We will cope. Okay, so today we are talking about building your data science portfolio, and we're using the term data science here pretty broadly. So, anything that, basically if you're using data, we're talking about that today. So let me just make some adjustments. No, it's not gonna let me. Okay, well, whatever, we will deal. Okay, so today's workshop is, sorry, I wasn't planning on having all the Zoom things on one screen, but it's not cooperating. All right. It was happening last week's workshop too, where Zoom decided to do some really fancy things for me and make life challenging. But anyway, today's workshop, we are going to be talking about how to make a data science portfolio. And this is something that's going to be used in conjunction with your CV, or potentially, given to potential colleagues and collaborators to demonstrate your skills. By the end of this workshop, we want you to be able to describe what it means to have a digital portfolio. We want you to have a clear set of goals for that portfolio. You will have that because you're going to hear me say it like a billion times today. We also want you to be able to describe methods for creating and curating your digital portfolio, and be able to articulate reasons why you want to choose a particular platform to host that portfolio on. We're also going to talk about how to get feedback, so you'll know how to do that by the time we're done today, and also you'll have a plan for sharing your portfolio once you've created it. So today our prereqs are pretty minimal. You all have these because you're here. Basically, you need a web browser. So good job. You're ready to go. And I just want to call out, we've got a little paragraph here. The icon set that we're using in this workshop, just to give it a little visual flair, because it's a lot of text, is the Redefining Women icon set from the Noun Project. It's a really cool project. So if you want to check that out, it's linked in our workshop materials. Okay, so I'm imagining, Pamela, you've got the link to the workshop reader in the, great, thanks. Since now I have only one screen, that is very helpful. So today in preparation, we recommend that you have access to your CV or resume. If you don't have this though right now, do not stress. You don't absolutely need it. It's just a good idea, especially after the workshop when you sit down to work on your portfolio. It's good to have it handy. If you haven't ever made a CV or a resume, or you need to update it, I would recommend checking out the materials at the UC Davis Internship and Career Center. Or if you're on another campus, you may also, you're going to have something similar as well. Or you can always just Google it and find out what schools have other cool materials as well. I'm also going to recommend that you have a list of the skills that you currently have, things you might want to highlight, and also a list of skills you might want to develop. You could just have this list in your head. No one's going to check it and see that you have this, printed out or anything like that. But just something to keep in mind. We're going to be working with these concepts throughout the workshop, and I may refer to your list. But again, if you don't have an actual physical list, that is okay. We also have a worksheet that you can download, and if you're following along in the reader, there's a link to it. This is not working. There we go. So we have this workshop. It's a PDF that you can download from our GitHub site if you want. So you can see we've already talked about the prepare section, and next we're going to talk about workflow after this. So the worksheet is just a nice little way to help you through the process we're going to talk about today, and kind of give you places to fill in some ideas and direct your thoughts, but it's by no means necessary. It was just something I thought might be helpful, given that we're going to be doing a lot of talking and showing you a lot of words today. And we want to give you a space to put some things down. All right, we're going to pause just for 1 second because my light is going out. All right, there we go. Okay, so today's workshop. Now we've kind of been through all of the intro stuff. What's the plan? What do we expect in terms of preparation and stuff like that? So now let's jump into the actual material. So we've mentioned this a little bit today already, that your portfolio is a digital tool that you can use in conjunction with a CV and other application materials, but you can also use it to help identify potential collaborators. Like, you have your CV or your portfolio out there on the web, and people may find it and want to work with you. So you can kind of think of it as an advertisement for the skill set that you have. So we like to think of it in Data Lab as public evidence of your data science skills. So you put out there into the world the things that you do well and demonstrate that, so that people can actually see that you can do the things that you say that you can do. So our approach for today, we kind of have you can think of this as like a workflow, and we're going to work through these in order today. However, I will say that you don't necessarily have to do them in the exact order that we have them, but this is how we're going to work on it today. In particular, I might recommend, depending on, how your personal brain works, you might want to start with step 3, but today we're going to start with step 1 just to have a place to start. So our suggested plan is that, and today we're going to start with figuring out what your goals are for your portfolio. Then after we figure out what our goals are, we are going to pick a couple projects, 2 or 3 that we want to start with that help build on those goals. Then we will choose a platform for our portfolio. Then you'll build a draft. You'll figure out who you want to get feedback from and implement that feedback, and then you're going to share it. So that's our plan for how we want to work through this today. I will say the plan for today is to get physically through steps 1 through 3, and then give you time to build a plan for the rest of the workflow. Building the actual portfolio to get to the draft part of this is going to take more time than we have today in the workshop. And you're going to want to spend some good time working on your own to build that draft. So we're not going to get through having an actual finished portfolio today, but you will have a plan for the whole process, steps 1 through 6. So that's our goals for today. Okay, so I promised you we would start with building our portfolios by setting some goals, and that is what we are going to do now. So you might think my goal of my portfolio is to get a job, right? Like that's why a lot of times we're building this is to get a job, but that's not exactly what we're talking about when we're talking about picking a goal. So a portfolio really should have a purpose. And you should think about what do you want your viewer, the viewer of your portfolio, to learn about you when they look at this portfolio. What skills do you want to represent that you have, and what skills you want to showcase that you can't articulate elsewhere? Those are the kinds of things that we want to do with our portfolio and when we're setting our goals. So your portfolio is not a CV. It should not be a catalog of everything you've ever done. What we want to do is curate our list of projects and examples to demonstrate our goal. So you can think about things like, let's see, you want to have a goal that is like both specific and achievable with your portfolio. So getting a job is kind of too nebulous. So you can think of like a good sentence to fill in if you're stuck on that is, this portfolio will help me get a job because it demonstrates my coding skills in Python, for example. Maybe it helps me illustrate my data visualization skills in R, or it helps me showcase my data science skills with respect to my personal domain. Maybe you're a biologist or you're in hydrology or English. So that's the kind of goals we want to set. Maybe you want to highlight your ability to complete projects, for example. To start from the very beginning, build a hypothesis, work with your data, and then run some tests, and then come up with a conclusion at the end of that. That would be a reasonable thing to do with a portfolio to demonstrate that skill of being able to see a project through from start to finish and do all the steps. So those are the kinds of things we're talking about when we're talking about setting a goal. So what should your reader learn about you from this portfolio? What kind of skills do you want to demonstrate? Basically, what should the viewer get out of this if they're looking at it? So some questions you might want to think about asking yourself, aside from filling in the sentence, this portfolio will help me get a job because. You might want to think about, after viewing your portfolio, what impression do you want your viewer to have of your skill set? What story do you want to tell? Maybe you want to tell a story about your creativity or your ability to make beautiful data visualizations. You might want to think about what jobs you're applying to or what field you work in and what skills and qualities are important in that field. So that might help you define a goal as well. If it's really important, for example, that you have database skills, then probably your goal needs to be related to sharing your skills with respect to databases. So what skills do you want to highlight? Another thing you might ask actually too is what skills do you want to learn? So coming back to that list of skills that you want to develop, that might be a place to think about projects that you want to make in the future that will also be added to this portfolio down the line. So those are just some things to think about. And what I want to do next is take a minute. This is kind of on your own, take 2 or 3 minutes to do. And I'd like you to write down 1 or 2 goals for your portfolio and write down what you want the viewer to learn about you. If you'd like, you can fill that in on the worksheet. So we have a section for goal setting where you can write down 1 or 2 goals for your portfolio. Or you can just, grab a sheet of paper, open up a Google Doc or something like that, and just write down a couple draft goals. They don't have to be finished goals. So if you're brand new to this and you're like, geez, I really don't know what it should be, come up with a couple draft ideas. It doesn't have to be set in stone. But if you have a couple of goals written down, you'll have something to work with in the next, when we get to the content portion, you'll need to have a goal in mind. So even if it's not a perfect goal, we want to have some kind of draft. And then when you're ready, if people don't mind, we'd like to have you share, one of your goals in the chat so other folks can see some ideas of goals that people have. And also, if we've got questions, I'm happy to answer some questions at this point too. All right, I see folks are starting to put some examples in the chat. I appreciate that. And again, these don't have to be perfect. They just need to be a draft, an idea. So somebody wrote that their goal is to demonstrate their expertise in signal processing. That's a great goal. That's very concrete. And so you'll be able to use that goal in our next section. Another goal, to communicate that I am capable of doing mixed method research and immigration policy. That's excellent. Demonstrating coding skills in R and working with large data sets. These are all great.
Oh, there's some good ones too about communication. So
yeah,
this is a wonderful thing to think about. Your portfolio itself can show how you talk, how you write, how you think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so some of you may read some of these, even though you have some really good goals already written in the chat. Feel free to tweak your goals as you see, some ideas. This is why we want to share them so that you can get some other ideas of what other folks are working on or working with. And you may see some good ideas that you might want to, adopt. And that is exactly why we want to share these. So demonstrating science communication skills, data visualizations, these are all great. Proficiency in your field is another good one, especially if you think about all the things that you need to do for your field to show that you're good at the skills needed for that field. So we'll talk about why these goals are going to matter in a minute, but these are going to help us. I'll preview this. We're going to help. It's going to help us select what content we're going to put in our portfolios.
What I love about this list that you're generating is these are all the things that are really hard to demonstrate on your CV and in your application. So that's another way to flip this, is what is something that people can't really assess by just looking at the laundry list of things that I've done.
Yeah, here's another good one, demonstrating transferable skills. Yes. So a lot of times, a lot of us are coming from academia and, our potential employers don't often know what a PhD or a master's degree will do for you, or even sometimes a bachelor's degree. So being able to show them concretely, here are the things I can do for you. That's what we're going for here. So that's an excellent goal. Demonstrating your ability to quickly learn new programs and languages. Yeah, that's huge, right? Especially for those of us working in the field of data science, we need to learn constantly. So thanks everyone.
Go ahead. I just want to add one more thing. This is also really great for those of you that have the transferable skills piece, and learning quickly is, your PhD might be in geospatial and you're applying for a more traditional computer science job. How do they know that you could do it? Right? Why should they even consider you if they're used to hiring computer scientists? Well, you have the skills too, and that's what your portfolio is going to show them.
Well, also because geo is computer science with geo. But if they don't know that, you'll want to show them that in your portfolio. Yeah, these are great. Feel free to keep adding ideas to the list as you think of them, or if anyone wants to tweak theirs and they want to share their new goals, feel free to add those to the chat as well. So I appreciate folks being willing to share. I know it's sometimes it can be a little nerve-wracking to share with a large group. So I very much appreciate your bravery in sharing. Okay, so that was, I will say this a billion times more in this workshop, that goal piece is critical. So setting your goal is going to help drive a lot of the choices that we make from here on out. And that's why we wanted to start with that. So next up, we're going to take our goal and we're going to start looking at content through the lens of that goal that we've just come up with. Oh, let me show you really quickly. I'll share my goal. So I have my personal research website, and I'm going to use this as an example throughout, just because I can pick on me and not feel bad. I don't want to grab somebody else's and be like, look at what they did. Here's what I would change. I can do that to me, and I won't be mad at me later. So this is my research website. It is something that I made a while ago. So you can see from the address that it is on Google Sites. So it's very old. It's been around for a long time, but I have had on this site for pretty much since the beginning, 2 tabs on there that I think of as my portfolio. So I have one for my cartography and art. And I'll show you more detail about this in a minute as we get into some examples. And then I have a tab for my code and projects, which I have recently updated because of this workshop, but also because it needed updating very badly. But the goal of my particular site and my portfolio pages in particular was originally it was to demonstrate why I do what I do. So I work, when I get to work on my own research interests, I am interested in California's beach vegetation. And not a lot of people study this. And in California in general, a lot of people don't even know that beaches should have vegetation on them, that there's actually a whole plant and animal community that should live there because they're used to seeing big sandy stretches of beach. And that's the picture postcard, but we actually should have dune vegetation on pretty much all of our beaches that are of any size. So I felt the need to build this thing to explain to people what I do and then also my skill set around that. So that was sort of the goal of my portfolio and also the website that's surrounding it. So I have a lot more context than maybe you will need. And we'll look at some examples that are a lot more simple than this when we get to the example section. But I just wanted to share that I have been through this process, and the goal of my particular site is really to give context around what I do, as well as sharing the skill set that I've developed around this particular ecosystem. So that's my goal. And then now you have a goal too, at least you have some draft. Pardon me just a second while I turn the light back on. Sorry, just for those of you who are wondering why I keep getting up, I'm in an office that has a light with a motion sensor. And when I'm teaching, I'm outside of the range of the motion sensor. And so it keeps bringing the lights down on me. Not that this lighting is excellent, but it's better than being in the dark. Okay, so now that we have our goal set and I've shown you an example of what my particular goal is, we're going to start looking at content. Now, every single portfolio needs at least one section, and that is your project section. The other thing that you really should highly consider is adding contact information. These don't necessarily need to be 2 separate pages on your site. They could be one, and I'll show you a really good example of combining them into one later. But these are like the 2 critical things you need to have on your portfolio site: projects and contact information. Projects, because we're demonstrating our skills, so we need to be able to show that we can do stuff. And contact information, because once someone has seen your site and they know they want to work with you, they need to be able to contact you to tell you that. So this is kind of logical, but we're going to talk about how to pick your projects and then also how to pick your contact information, as well as a couple other options for context on your site that are kind of less necessary, but things you might want to consider. Okay, so for your projects, This is really the heart of what you're doing here. This is the real reason we're building this whole thing in the first place, is to demonstrate our ability. And usually we're going to do that through the lens of projects. Okay, so I'm going to recommend that you have some kind of self-contained description about the projects that you're putting on your site. You can link out to other things, so you don't need to describe the whole project in its entirety and fully if it exists somewhere else. So you might want to give a brief description or an abstract and then link out to, for example, maybe it has a GitHub repository associated with it, or there's a whole project website around the thing you're doing. Or maybe you're working with other organizations that you can link to their sites. Totally okay to link out to other things, but it should have enough description that people know what you're doing and have a sense of it without having to go all over the place to see what your part is in it. I'm also going to recommend that you consider adding visuals in some way, shape, or form, just to give your website a little bit more of a visual interest. But also, if you're working with visuals, you want to make sure that you're doing things like adding alt text so that people who are using screen readers also know what's going on there. So you want to think about, if you're adding visuals, you might think, well, great, if I'm going to demonstrate my ability to code, maybe there's not a lot of visuals. You have some options. You could, and I'll show you some examples on my particular site. You could present a workflow diagram instead of a picture. You could also, if you have a data visualization that comes out of your code, you could put that, an image of that data visualization, or you could consider stock imagery. So that's stock imagery is like pictures that come from a website with the idea that it's pictures of things that you can use in your own website. Also, you can use your own imagery. But if you're going to be using stock imagery, just make sure that it's licensed in a way that you can use it. So for example, if you were writing code around like a project in Data Lab, for example, was around MPAs, like marine protected areas, maybe if you can't share a visualization of something that came out of the code itself, maybe a nice picture of a marine protected area, somebody doing some kind of ecological sampling might be interesting. Just something to grab attention can be really helpful. And the other thing we want to do is, this is where having the list, your CV comes in handy to know kind of the list of places you've worked and maybe some of the projects you've worked on. We want to now select projects of all the things we've done in our careers, which the list may be long or short. We're going to pick projects now that specifically relate to the goal that we just set in the previous section. So when we talked about goal setting and you put your goal in the chat, now we're going to start thinking about which of our projects do we want to include in our portfolio that match those goals. So I'm going to take a little detour over here to show you mine. So I've since I started this site, my career has expanded into some areas I never thought it would. So I now have several publications in the field of wine geography, health geography, and historical geography. So I've kind of made sections for that on mine, as well as the sandy beach vegetation stuff. But so I have descriptions for each project, kind of a brief overview of what this project is about. I've got an image. In this case, it's a conceptual ecological model. And then I have a list of publications that are related to it. And then I've got some other things that go along with this section, some web maps that I've built where I've taken screenshots from the web maps themselves, just to show people like, hey, you can come click on this map and it will tell you what literature is there. And then I've got a Zotero bibliography that's related to that web map, where I've just taken a screenshot of Zotero to make an image. Hopefully that brings people in, because it by itself maybe isn't that interesting, but as you're scrolling down, the whole collection looks a little different, so it can grab some attention. So screenshots are great. In my wine geography section, I have images from presentations and what do you call them? Figures from publications that I think are eye-catching. So people will see those hopefully and be like, ooh, what's that about? Even if they aren't interested in wine geography, maybe the image itself is attention grabbing, and that will help direct some interest. So I'm a geographer, so I get to put a lot of maps, which I think are nice. And that's helpful. I do have a couple where I don't have images yet, and I just went ahead and left those blank, but I will fill them in once the publications are available. So just to give you an idea of how you might structure something like this. So the next activity that I want to do is, again, this one's kind of a work on your own thing. We'll take a few minutes and you can work on your worksheet. We have a content section. The goal of the next couple minutes is I want you to start thinking about pick 2 or 3 projects that you've done in recent history, and then think about how does that project help support the goals that you've set for your portfolio. And one of 2 things might happen. You might list out your projects and then think, oh, this really doesn't help support my goal, so I'm going to cross it off and maybe I will save that for something else. Or you might think, geez, I thought I wanted to talk about how good I am at Python, but I'm actually seeing I have a lot of data visualizations going on here. So maybe I need to adjust my goals. And that's okay. You don't have to stick with the specific goal you started with. This can be an iterative process where we refine what we want to actually put on our portfolio. So if you start changing your mind a bit about your goals, that is okay too. You're not stuck with that goal. You could take the approach though of today, keep sticking with your draft goal and just figuring out what projects fit and then adjust later. And that's fine too. But what I'd like to have you do right now is just come up with 3 goals and think to yourself, how does this support, or 3 projects and think about how does that support my goals? And then if you'd like, you can share one of your projects and how it supports your goal in the chat so other folks can get some ideas. Just catching up with the chat now in case there was anything I needed to see, but I suspect people would verbally tell me if there was something critical. Also, if you don't have 3 projects that fit your goal, you might take this opportunity to think about adding some projects to your list that maybe you'd like to actually do, so future projects. So if your goal really is to demonstrate your skills in Python and you don't have a lot of projects, maybe you could come up with some ideas about how to fill that gap that you've now identified. And so you might think like, okay, well, maybe I need to add a few more of these projects and start thinking about what would interest you and what kinds of projects could you do to add to your portfolio.
Mm-hmm. Or another spin on that too, as you're thinking about future ones, but still dealing with the only one project that you have, is how can you decompose that project to highlight different skills, right?
Yeah.
So maybe you want to break it up and just talk about your ability to work with and clean data, or gather data and then analyze it and then visualize it. Think about ways you can chunk something to tell discrete stories of your skills.
Yeah, you kind of saw that also in my my list of projects where I have the web map, but I also have the Zotero library, and those are actually not 2 separate things. So the web map is actually built directly from that Zotero library because all the spatial data is housed in the Zotero library. But if you're just looking for the library or the list of citations, you don't really care about the web map. So splitting those up is actually okay as long as they're discrete entities. All right, so again, reminder, if you can take a second to put one of your examples of a project and how it supports your portfolio goal into the chat, that would be really helpful for other folks to see some ideas out there. So in the meantime, I'll come over and show you talk a little bit more about mine specifically. So one of the things, sorry, I'm scrolling around and probably making people motion sick. So one of the things as I was reworking my portfolio page in the last month or so while I was writing this workshop was how do I deal with the fact that my career has changed since I built this? And so one of the things that I wanted to demonstrate with a new version of this was not only have I continued to work in my chosen area of interest, but also that I've expanded. I'm using the same skill set, but I'm applying it to new places. So that's kind of driven some of my choices about how I've structured my particular portfolio. So I'm trying to demonstrate that I still use my same skills, but I'm doing it in different fields. So I see we've got a question about things working with projects that are not publicly available, and we will get to that. We actually have a section on that, so sit tight. We will cover that. But you can get creative. I'll just preview that. There are some creative things that you might be able to do to still protect your project, but be able to share a little bit. So question about would including projects from relevant coursework be appropriate in the sort of portfolio? Yes, definitely. I would be clear about the fact that you did that as part of your coursework, but it's I think that it's still reasonable to include that on your portfolio to share. I think there's very good reasons to do that, especially, it's different if it was like, you followed lab instructions and produced, the homework. That's different than like you were given an assignment to take some data and create your own thing from it. If you had some degree of autonomy, I think that's probably a better choice than just, this was the answer to this week's homework assignment where someone else developed the workflow for that. If you were kind of developing it on your own as a part of an assignment, that would probably be better than the homework kind of working through the lab book kind of situation. But you can tweak those things, right? Like you can take a similar workflow and apply it to your own data and then include that on your portfolio. So as long as you can make these coursework kind of situations more independent where you're doing something similar, but you're still adding your own piece and creativity to it. I think that's kind of better. Hopefully that helps answer the question.
I've also seen that used really effectively when students, they just have for a specific skill, it was just a class project. And what they've gone is they put it in their portfolio, but they've also expanded it just a little bit, right? Just taken it and maybe they've added some extra narrative or made some extra visualizations. Maybe, as Michele said, they went and tested the model on a different data set. So, so definitely can include it, but as she said, be transparent that the origin was from a class project. We can kind of usually tell when we're looking at portfolios if something was a class project versus not. And that is something that I look for is like, are people really telling the story of why this came about? Was this your research idea or someone else's? Like, that's really important. And giving credit to others is wonderful. It's a really great skill, and it shows other things like how collaborative you are, how much you recognize the complexity of working with other people and doing research. So when we're asking you to really, show what you did, this is why we want you to really show all the backstory.
All right, so hopefully you've got some ideas about what you might include in your portfolio to meet your goals. So I think next up we'll kind of shift over to the contact information section. Sorry, the light is going out again. If the desk was moved over like 4 feet, it would be in the line of sight. Anyway, hopefully this is some comic relief. Okay, so we've talked a little bit now about how to identify which projects you're going to include on your portfolio. And we'll get some more time later to get into some breakout groups, and you can talk in smaller groups and kind of bounce ideas off of each other, which might be helpful for those of you still trying to figure out what you want to include. And this also is going to be a process. If you're doing this over the long term like me, you're going to be editing, over the years, and that is normal. So just keep that in mind. It doesn't have to be perfect to start. So the next thing we're going to think about, aside from our projects, is contact information. The traditional thing to do is include your name and your email address, which is great, but there are some other things that you might want to include. But also let's stop and talk about names for a second. The name you put on your portfolio should probably be the name that you're going to be using on your job applications and publications, but you also want to consider using other names that you may be well known by. So in the digital age, you may have a handle that you're using that isn't your given name. It maybe isn't a nickname that someone would call you by in person, but on the internet, you are known by that. I know several people who have very identifiable handles on various places that is not at all related to their name that they go by in the real world. If that is the case for you, you might want to include that prominently on your contact information page so people can connect you with that other entity that they know online. So for example, I've seen this happen with folks who use IRC pretty regularly or Discord. They may have a name that they go by there that's different, or things like Stack Exchange. You may have a handle that you use that people know you by, and it is okay to put that in addition to your regular name for your contact information. You do want people to make those connections if they're valuable. You also probably want to include your email address, and you will see when we get to the examples of how people handle email addresses so that bots do not scrape your email address and email you every day about whatever. I'm not sure how great it works these days, but it's pretty common to see. And I'll show you, I use one version, and one of the examples I'm going to show you uses another way to do this. Now, if you are an academic, you want to consider linking to your ORCID ID or your Google Scholar profile, or both, or also linking to other academic profiles like academia.edu or Kudos or Figshare or any of the multitude of academic profiles that are out there. Again, you don't need to do all of these. Pick and choose what matches, your goals for your portfolio, and also your personal brand that's out there, or the things that you think are going to be most useful in making connections with your colleagues. You might want to also consider linking to your GitHub profile or other code repositories that you might use in the course of your work. So if you use that, you might want to link to it. You do not have to, however. You might also want to consider linking to other tech community profiles. So if you're really active, for example, on Stack Exchange or Stack Overflow or Reddit in a professional capacity, you might want to link to that. I think a lot of folks out there have LinkedIn profiles, and so you might want to also consider linking to your LinkedIn profile. If you have another website, like you've seen my professional website, but I have other websites for other things, I might link between all of those, to connect them all up. So I might want to put that on my contact information if that was relevant to me. And now the last thing I want to talk about is social media. So you may have a multitude of social media accounts, or maybe you have none. If you do have social media accounts, you might consider linking them in your contact information section, but only if it represents you professionally. So I will give you an example. I use Twitter. So hi, GIS chat folks who are joining us today. I use Twitter professionally, and I tweet about map things and coding and cartography and things like that. So I actually have linked in my contact information to my Twitter account because I am known there. I have an Instagram account, but it's mostly pictures of things that I have baked and pictures of my cats. So I will not link to that professionally because that's just not a part of my professional life. I do have an Instagram account, but I will not be linking to it professionally. The same thing might be true of accounts on things like TikTok and YouTube. I actually do link to my YouTube account. I don't have the TikTok account, but you might use TikTok professionally. I have heard there is a whole data science and mapping community on TikTok. I am tempted to check it out. So you want to curate this, right? Like you only want to link the social media accounts that are relevant to communicating with your people professionally. So I'll show you my contact information just so you get an idea of what this might look like for you. So I have my email address here. You'll notice that I've removed the @ symbol and the dot. I don't know how well this actually works to keep bots from scraping it. I'm sure someone who wanted to could find this and probably do something with it. but it's a nice thought. So this is how we do it. Other people have similar things on their sites, and you'll see that in a minute. But I have linked to Twitter. I've linked to GitHub, YouTube, Google Scholar. I've got my ORCID link on there. I will also mention that I discovered while I was updating this that I had things on here that no longer existed. And I was like, what was this thing? And I clicked on it and got a 404 error. I was like, okay, I need to take that off. So you have to like curate this and go through it sometimes and check out your links and make sure that your contact information is up to date and that you haven't linked to something that no longer exists. So in particular, that link was to a tool that used to aggregate, it was called Impact Store. It used to aggregate all of your impact across multiple things, and then it just stopped working, I guess. It was nice while it lasted, but I forgot it even existed. So that's probably why it's gone. So again, there's a ton of things, and this is not the only list. This is a big, big, long list of things you could put for contact information, but you do not have to put all of it. You're going to pick and choose what you think is most appropriate for the goals of your portfolio and also your personal brand, how that fits in. And if you don't think you have a personal brand, we do have workshops on campus about building that. So that's a whole separate workshop. All right, so that's contact information. So you do need some kind of project section, you call it something else, but a place where you highlight your projects and a way for people to contact you. Those are critical to have on your portfolio. The rest of the sections we're going to talk about are kind of nice to have. You could do it if you want, but they're not mandatory. So you'll see when, especially when we look at some of the examples, a lot of folks like to put an about section where they talk about themselves, give a brief description of their background, maybe talk a little bit about the context of their work, usually not as extensively as I have it on my site, but again, that fit my goals. So you want to think about what your goals are for your site and if having an about section even makes sense given your goals. But that can be your place to introduce yourself. And give people some personal context if that's what you want to do. Another thing you might do, I've seen on other portfolios, is having a list of skills. So you could just make a list of skills that you want to highlight. But I would recommend thinking about how you want to integrate that in terms of demonstration. So you want to link that skill list to skills that you've actually demonstrated in your portfolio. So you might want to think about maybe you arrange your portfolio page in terms of skills, if that's really what you want to highlight instead of just having a list. Also, depending on what platform you choose, you may have options like I have several sites on WordPress, so I'll use that as an example, but I think other website builders do this too. Certain templates that you can get will let you tag posts with different keywords, and then you can filter your posts by keywords. So you could actually have it set up that every time you add a new project, it'll kind of add it to the appropriate list. So things to think about automating a skills list might be helpful. And then for our academics out there, a list of publications, and I have a publications list. I also have a list of presentations I've given. So those are the kinds of things you can add to for context to show how you're engaging with academia, if that's your jam. So those are just some things you can put on your website in addition to the actual list of projects and your contact information. But it's not the only list of things. You can get creative and add things as needed. So don't feel like, oh, Michelle said she didn't list that thing I was thinking about, so I can't do it. You totally can. Just make sure that it meets your goals for your portfolio. Have I mentioned goals enough yet? Probably 1,000 more times by the time we're done. Okay, so any questions about content before we move on?
There's a good question in the chat that I'm just going to address verbally, if that's okay. Regarding, okay, so you did a bunch of work and you published it in an academic journal. Should you repopulate that in your portfolio? My initial reaction is, well, why? Why would you repopulate it? And off the top of my head, I could think, well, maybe your target audience for what you're showcasing, maybe the goals of your portfolio don't align with who would be actually able to access the journal article. So, if it's not an open access article, that could be a problem for prospective employer or funder to actually see it. And maybe that isn't really a goal for them to be able to see the full entirety of the project. It's just one piece of that publication that you want to highlight, or one specific skill set from it. So if you're completely duplicating, I would ask yourself, like, why am I needing to recreate it all? Is there some specific reason for that, the access thing, or is there a piece of it that I can lift over for goals? Do you have anything else to add to that, Michele?
Yeah, I think that covers it. I'll just, since I've got the example here, like for mine, like I've kind of grouped up my publications by topic. So you can kind of rearrange things and pull out things you want to highlight. There are, I will mention, there are sites that are really good at, like Kudos is one of them, where the goal is to communicate your publications to a lay audience. So you might want to look into sites like that as well if you're thinking about, how do I communicate this paper and the like the workflow and things like that to people who maybe aren't in academia. So you might want to check out those kinds of sites too, that you can then use as a link in your portfolio to help explain. Basically, the portfolio is like the nucleus, and everything else is like exploding out from there. So there are lots of ways and lots of tools that you can use to help kind of meet some of these goals. And it's not going to be fully fulfilled by your portfolio. In all likelihood, you're probably going to have to reach out to other things to pull in. So some of those communicator sites might be really helpful if that's, if communicating your research to a lay audience is a concern, or to potential employers who are outside of academia or outside of your, like, I think of it as like a micro domain. Like I'm a biogeographer, but I study beach plants, and I'm like one of very few people who do that. So how do I explain that to other people? So that might be something that's helpful to link out to those kinds of things. All right, so any other questions that we should answer before we move on to platforms? All right, I know that we're moving very quickly and we're throwing a lot of information at you. So I just want to remind you that our materials will be online forever and ever, as far as we're concerned. We may update them at some point, but you will have access to this after you leave here, and the workshop worksheet as well. So really quickly checking in, our next section in the worksheet is platforms, and I'm going to have a screen full of words. If you just want to stay on this one and look at this, this is sort of honed in on the details that really matter. But so platforms. We now have an idea of our goals for our portfolio. We know what content that we want to put. At least we've got a draft of ideas for what content we want to put on that portfolio. But now we got to put it somewhere. So now we're going to talk about the where this lives part of this. And so we think of that as the platform. So this is the online tool that's going to host our portfolio and make it available to people on the internet. A lot of times the platform looks very much like a website. And so we're going to focus on that aspect of making a portfolio, but you could also do a digital portfolio and say, make it into a PDF and then email that to people. But we're going to focus on the kind of portfolio that lives on the internet as a website. So that's what I'm going to talk about now. So you've got several options, and we're not going to cover anything in detail. But I will invite you, if you're a UC Davis affiliate, to come talk to us in office hours if you need some help with some of these things. So some things to think about when you're picking a platform. First off, I would say think about technical considerations. So what platforms are commonly used in your field? You may find that like a lot of people have WordPress sites or Weebly sites, and you like the way they look. So maybe that's a reason to pick it. It kind of fits with the vibe of everyone else's. Let's see, do you have prior experience in a particular platform? So I will keep mentioning WordPress because that's what I have experience with. So that's usually my go-to if I need to make a new thing. I wouldn't necessarily recommend Google Sites, which obviously I started with, but it's not the easiest thing to work with at this point. So yeah, so, you know, do you have experience with that? Or do you want to develop skills in a particular area? Maybe you've always wanted to learn to program in HTML, or you want to use Shiny, or you wanted to learn how to use GitHub Pages or hone your skills in any of those areas. That's a really relevant reason to pick those tools instead of something else. You might also want to think about style considerations. You know, are you interested in building your own CSS for your website and making it look pretty using your own skills? Or do you want something that's just ready to go that looks nice right off the bat? Something that has a template that you can use and make it look professional quickly. That's a perfectly good reason to decide to do that, you know, one way or the other. Let's see. Also, you might want to think about, like, are you going to be using a lot of images, and does the tool you're using display the images in a way that works for you, or are you going to have to, you know, hassle with it to get it to look the way you want? And then also think about maintenance. You know, is this something that you're going to be updating frequently? Do you want control over all of the things that are required, or do you want someone else to handle it? It's possible that even though you have certain skills, you may decide to go one way or the other. You might decide to go the pre-built route, or you might decide to build your own. So a couple of options. One is to go with a website builder. So a tool that exists, these are typically online, that are designed to have a graphical interface. You log in and you build the website with a graphical tool, and oftentimes these are what we call WYSIWYGs. So what you see is what you get. It's kind of like editing a Word document. You don't have to know HTML or JavaScript or any of that stuff. You just type in the box. You can highlight things and make it bold and change it to a heading and things like that with a click of a button. And these are really good options for novices, but also if you are a pro and you just don't want to have to handle HTML, CSS, JavaScript, all that stuff when you're working on your portfolio. So they're easy to update. So if you know this is something you're going to just want to go and update quickly and not have to hassle with stuff, sometimes a website builder is a really good option. Some things you might want to look at. These are just off the top of my head, but like I said, I have experience with WordPress. I know folks who have websites on Wix and Weebly. Why they all start with W, I don't know. Maybe you can pick one that doesn't start with a W. But these all have free options. So you can sign up for a free account and host a free website. You know, they've got a certain amount of tools and features that are available to you. They also have, you can pay for more features and things like that. But I will say, like, in my experience, the free options are pretty sufficient for getting up a good solid website. There's not a lot that you might need if you just want to do something that's pretty standard. So some pros and cons to consider about using one of these website building tools. On the pro side of things, these are graphical interfaces. There's no coding necessary. So that can make your life easier depending on what your goals are. They come with the content manager, so they help you find posts and rearrange things and stuff like that. They come with pre-built styles, so you don't have to build your own. You can just pick from the list. You can have multiple pages on these sites, and they look professional very quickly. So those are on the pro side. The con side, though, if you want to do a lot of customizing, we have learned firsthand, WordPress is not your thing if you want to customize a lot of stuff. And I think that's the case with all of the website builders. If you're good with things out of the box, you like the template, you're just going to put words on it, it's great. If you want to do a lot of customizing or interactivity, you probably want to go with a different route. So just think about that. If you're going to be building like interactive web maps on this thing directly, you probably want to go with something else besides a website builder. So that brings me to the other option, which is building your own website. And there's a multitude of ways to do this. What you will need to do is think about content and how you're going to handle that. So are you going to code your own HTML and CSS and probably some JavaScript along with that to make it do the things you want? You know, do you want to use a static site generator to build HTML or Markdown with a tool like Jekyll or Sphinx? Are you going to have your own content manager, or are you just going to, is it going to be simple enough you don't need a content manager plugged into that. You could certainly build out something very complex and add all these things in there, or you could just do a straight up, HTML page. That's pretty simple. So we won't get into the details of how to actually build your own website. I will say next quarter, we are planning a leaflet workshop with Maptime Davis. So if you want to learn to do some HTML, you can join us next quarter for that. Another thing you might want to think about is hosting. So if you're going to be building your own website, you will need a place to put it. So my guess, though, is if you are building your own website, you have a general idea of where that is, whether that's on GitHub Pages or something like Amazon Web Services, or on your own server, for example. You'll need a place to actually put it. But if you're just getting started with this, something like GitHub Pages is pretty straightforward. The last thing you want to think about is, do you want to have a custom domain? So a domain is something like ucdavis.edu. If you're at a different university, you have something similar for yours. And then you attach web pages to that to build out the whole website. So you can purchase your own domain. So I could, go get, michelletobias.com if that was available. I have not actually purchased my own domain. I just haven't felt the need for it, but you'll see some examples of portfolios where some of my colleagues have done that just because they want to be able to tell people to go to, their first and last name.com. So you could do that. But most of the time, the standard thing that you get with either a website builder, like with GitHub Pages or something like that, is perfectly fine. You don't need to pay for a domain to be considered professional. I would just be cautious of your username is all. If it's your first and last name, great. If it's something else, you may have some explaining to do at some point. Some pros of building your own website is that you get control over every aspect of the site that you want control over. And if you're looking to demonstrate your skills with building websites, this is a good option. So if you want to show that you can build a good website in addition to all the other things you're doing, by all means, build your own website. Some of the cons to think about is it takes a while to get up and started, especially if it's new, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. But also think about the fact, how are you going to keep up with potential security issues and things like that? Just something to think about. And depending on the site, it may or may not be an issue, but there is some maintenance that goes into building your own site. I will also say from experience that websites eventually look old and then you have to retool them so that they don't look so old because things change. And then finally, for getting started with a platform, if you're short on time, we have a couple of options for you to think about. I will say that the options that are quick to get started are good starters, but I would recommend that eventually you build out a full portfolio if you actually need a portfolio. So a couple of options. The first one is LinkedIn. LinkedIn has a section you can turn on called Featured, and you can link to a bunch of projects. And it kind of looks like a mini portfolio. It's lateral across the page. And it has pictures and little descriptions. And it's a good way to get started, but it's definitely not the same thing as having a fully built out portfolio. So you might want to do that anyway. And then once you've built your portfolio, you can link to your portfolio in your featured section. And that would probably be a good idea. But as you're curating that, if you're trying to get started quickly, you might think about the things you're putting in your LinkedIn profile, maybe eventually go on your full portfolio as you build that out. Another option would be to, if you're on GitHub, you could make a repository that's specifically to hold your portfolio. You can build out a README file that has links in a very similar way to building out a website. And that can work, especially if you're going to keep it super simple. But I will say that if you're applying to a job where you actually do need to submit a portfolio, the GitHub route might be underwhelming. So you just want to be careful about your audience and does this really hit the mark? Do I need a full portfolio or not? So some pros and cons with going with the quick getting started route are on the pro side of things that these can be really nice if they're used in conjunction with a full portfolio, and they can also be a really good starting point for building out a full portfolio. But on the flip side, you want to be careful about your audience because these can have less impact than a full portfolio. And you might, if an employer, a potential employer is expecting a portfolio from you and you go this route, it might be underwhelming and it might reflect negatively on your skills. So you really want to consider your audience. You know, if you think a full built out portfolio is what you really need, you might consider using these as a jumping off point, but you wouldn't want to stay here if that is, if a full portfolio is needed. So I just want to give you options, sort of the full spectrum of, you know, from the quick and easy getting started through all the way building your own website and everything in between. You can kind of pick your own adventure and just be kind of aware of what you're getting into, regardless of what tool you use. And again, if I'm switching over to our worksheet here, we've got some checklists here. If you find yourself checking more things in the top section, you might want to go with a website builder. And if you are checking more things in the bottom section, you might want to consider building your own website, just to give you an idea of where you're headed with that. So I no longer see the chat at all. So okay, we're good. Pamela's giving me the thumbs up. Zoom I keep rearranging things and it is making my life challenging. Okay, all right. It never fails. You give a workshop and all the things can go wrong. Okay, so that is choosing your platform. So hopefully now you have some idea of what route you want to go, and you probably want to spend some time like thinking about what your best option is. And this is the exact reason why we're not going to finish a full portfolio today. There's just way too much to do in terms of building a website. Yeah, so hopefully you have some idea of what you want to do. And the place now, so we've kind of, to go back and kind of put all this together so far, we set our goals, we've planned our content, and now we know where we're going to put that content. So we've kind of gone through the first 3 steps here. Next thing I want to do is show you some examples, because I've given you a lot of examples of mine, and you're probably tired of looking at beach plant stuff. I'm not, but you might be. So we're going to take a look at some examples. And we've got a big long list here, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but I do want to show you for sure Arthur's, because I think this is a really good example of a nice, simple way of doing this. It's very effective. He has 1 page. He has his name at the top. He has a brief description of who he is and what he does, just a couple sentences. He has some contact information next. So this is all contact information and projects are all on the same page. And then as you scroll down, you get the list of projects where you've got some nice descriptive titles. You've got some more description text. You've got links out to different websites and places for more context and more detail. And then he's got a nice visualization. And he has unified that visualization by making them all circles. So they all, even though they're different things, they all look visually pretty similar. So there's that repetition there with the circles, even though the projects themselves, I can tell you, are not all circles. So, but it's just, it's a nice unifying look. So you could go circles or you could go squares or whatever. But I just like that this is, even though it's got some very different visualizations, they're kind of unified in the shape, even though the colors aren't the same. So I'm putting on my art hat here for a little bit as an artist. I'm like, what do I like about this? So these are just, I think this is really nicely done. It's definitely a target that all of you who are getting started could shoot for. The first round of this could very easily be something like this. And he's got, 5 or 6 projects on here, but you could easily start with 3 and have this look very well done and well put together. The other one I for sure want to show you is Sam's. Sam's is a nice example of a similar setup to the way Arthur's done his, but his has more context around it. He has multiple pages where he's got a home page with some details about what he does and who he is, and a nice engaging visual there. He has a separate bio where he talks about, some more context about himself, a little bit more history and his interests. He lists his contact information. And here, again, you can see, and Arthur did something similar with the email address, where we're taking out the ats and dots to help produce the bots. He actually lists his CV and he has his list of teaching as well. So you can see, you can imagine Sam is probably applying for teaching jobs because he's listing his teaching as well. But then he also has a project list that again has his titles. He's got a nice quick description, 3 or 4 sentences, and then some visuals. And as you scroll down, you see different projects with different visuals and descriptions. And they're grouped up depending on, how he thought it was most useful to group them up. But again, I think that especially the project page is something that is a nice template that you could, use as a starting point. Aiming for something like this is totally doable on pretty much any of the platforms that we talked about. And then just checking my time real quick. Really quickly, another nice one. Did it not open? Where did it go? There we go. I think Jared's is a nice example too of he has some video on his header here, so you can get an idea of the kinds of visualizations he's doing. So again, we're adding more detail and more interest here. So if you wanted to go this route, you could certainly do that where you're linking some of the skills that you've developed in terms of data visualization. You can highlight that on your website with these kinds of things. But you can also be very effective with a very simple site as well. So there's just different ways to do this, different ways to represent your skill set, and different ways to get attention. And we have a big long list here of portfolios. And if you have others that you think we should add, let me know. Mostly these are Data Lab people, alums, and current employees, except Allison Horst, who does communication about data science through cartoons on her site. So I recommend that if you are more on the vein of art projects. I threw that on there just because I think she does a nice job of showing a bunch of different visualizations that are perhaps different than you are used to seeing. They're not just graphs. They include things like dragons and puffballs and stuff. So it's just super fun and informative. So I think we will have a chance, if we get some time at the end, to come back and look at some more examples. But what I'd like to do right now is switch over to getting feedback, unless folks have some questions that we should answer right now. All right, I think we're good. So what I want to do is talk quickly about how to get feedback. So I just want to acknowledge that getting feedback can be really nerve-wracking. You've built a thing that represents you, and it can be really challenging to be ready to share that with folks. So I just want to acknowledge that and acknowledge that it's going to take some bravery sometimes to share these things out with folks and ask people what they think. So when you're asking for feedback, I would recommend, if you're feeling anxious about this, to roll out your feedback, starting with folks who you really trust, and then kind of, once you get some good feedback from folks and you implement that, then kind of build out further and further into your network. And that can help with some of the anxiety around asking for feedback on these kinds of things. But when you do approach someone to get feedback, you could just give them the link and say, what do you think? And see what they say. But I would recommend asking for some direct feedback. And you can tailor this to where you think you have strengths or potential weaknesses. But some things that I would ask if I was making a new portfolio is I would ask the person, does this portfolio make a good impression? So as you look at this, is this impressive? Do I look like I know what I'm doing, or do I need to do some work? Is there something about this that's giving you a good or a bad vibe? Are my projects well described? Are the descriptions engaging? Is this something that makes sense, or are you just confused after you read it? And what skills does the viewer perceive? So if I'm going to give this to a friend and say, hey, can you take a look at my portfolio? Can you tell me what skills you think I have after you're done reading it, what skills that I've highlighted well? And that'll give you an idea of if you've met your goal. Does the person really see the things that you want them to see, or do you need to tweak them so that you make sure that that goal is met? Is there anything missing? It's not uncommon for me to forget about projects just because we do a lot of project work in data lab. So some stuff I've done years ago, I totally forgot about. And maybe a colleague will be like, hey, you should include this project that you did, however many years ago that you've now forgotten about. And then I'll be like, yeah, I should. That's a really good idea. So you might want to, especially someone who knows your work well, they might have some ideas about things that might be missing. And then also you might want to share your goal with your reviewer and say, this is what I wanted to achieve. Do you think I've met that mark? So you can approach this in different ways, but those are the kinds of things I would be asking if I was going to be doing this from scratch at this point. Now, once you get the feedback from people, that's a whole nother story, right? If you've ever been through the review process with the publications, sometimes feedback can sting a little. So I just want to acknowledge that too, and acknowledge some bravery that it takes to actually read the reviews you get back from folks. Even if they have your best interest at heart, sometimes it can be frustrating. So I will say you should ground your decisions in which feedback you are going to use and implement based on the goals of your portfolio. So if your goal is to represent yourself in a professional way and describe your skills, let's say with Python, you might, somebody gives you some feedback about the way that your site looks, you might take it with a grain of salt if you don't like the way that it would look if you made those changes. So you get to decide whether or not you implement it. And whether you decide to use it or not, that can be a tricky decision. This is why it's a good idea to get a few people to give you feedback, because then you can kind of get an idea if one person's feedback is kind of an outlier, like maybe the feedback they're giving you is kind of not in line with what you're hearing from other folks. And then maybe you weigh that less, or maybe it's an insight, maybe even though it seems very different from what other people are saying, it might give you some insight as well. So you kind of have to weigh those things and decide what you really want to use or not use. I will also say, coming from just sort of putting on my cartography hat, sometimes you will get reviews from people, some comments, things like the font is too small. And I will say sometimes the answer is yes, your font is too small. Sometimes though, you need to think creatively about the feedback you're giving and say, but I made the font 14 point to start by default, so it should be big enough. Why do they think the font is too small? Maybe it's that you used a novelty font for your paragraphs and it's really hard to read because it's very flourishy. Okay, maybe that's actually, it won't get better actually if it gets bigger. Maybe I need to change my font entirely. Maybe I used a serif font that's not so flourishy, but maybe it's still hard to read. So maybe because I'm on a website, I should go with the sans serif font. Maybe it's about the contrast. Maybe my website that I built has a dark gray background and I put black text on it, and people are having trouble reading the font, not because it's too big or too small. It's because there's not enough contrast between the background and the font itself. So you may get something that seems straightforward, like the font is too small, but you may have to get creative about how you solve that and how you interpret that. You could also go back to the person and say, I made the font 14 point. What else about it is hard to read? You can get more feedback and ask more questions, but I just want to point out that sometimes the feedback that you get on something, especially a creative endeavor, you may have to get creative about how you answer that particular piece of feedback. So hopefully that gives you a few skills to work with once you get that feedback, how you might approach working with that. All right, so the next thing we wanted to do was give you some time to plan your portfolio. What I'd like to do is, I think we planned on 20 minutes for this, but maybe we should make it about 15, given the amount of time that we've got left. What I'd like to do is have you guys hop into some breakout rooms and discuss some ideas about how you're going to approach building out your portfolio. So let's see, this will be an endeavor in doing breakout
rooms. Before you all start dropping off, because oh my gosh, we're gonna make you talk to another person. Go to the breakout rooms, talk to another person. You might meet someone from another UC who's doing similar cool work. And this is an opportunity to get free help from peers. So please take advantage of this.
Yeah, definitely. So let's see. The wonders of Zoom. Now my breakout rooms tool is missing.
You want me to set it up?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Okay, how many rooms do you want?
If we were going to put, I think we put about 3 people in each room. How many folks have we got?
Let's do 10 rooms because people are dropping.
Yeah, but definitely stick around, people. It will be worth your time to chat with other folks. And if anybody has problems, feel free to come back to the main room, and we'll help sort things out if you need help. Or if you have questions you want to direct to us specifically, we're happy to answer those here too.
Just as a reminder to join your room, go ahead and click the breakout room button.
I think I'm going to pause the recording while we do this. Hey, welcome back, everybody. I hope you had some good discussions in your rooms. I'm going to share my screen again just to keep me on track. Where did that go? Here we go. Can't leave me alone for a second. I will lose track of what I'm doing. Okay, so in the interest of time, is there anyone, is there 1 or 2 folks who want to share, some of the things that they talked about, especially were there any special considerations or problem areas that you think you might have, or some, special situations you're dealing with? Let's call it that. Would anyone like to share some of the discussions that they had? If not, that's okay too.
Data confidentiality,
yeah.
that's a great one.
I was actually just about to say, in my group, we talked about putting projects online, right? But some of the issues come into how much code can I put online that I'm not violating any type of licensing or anything like that. And if my code is directly related to my data, say I want to post an analysis online, how would I go about navigating that and making sure that I'm not upsetting any other company or entity, right, by sharing either data or data artifacts that exist within my code?
Yeah, that's a big concern. Any other folks with other things that maybe are hiccups they're anticipating, some things that might be challenging with building their particular portfolio?
I'll highlight a couple in the chat on data confidentiality. So similar to what was just mentioned, but going back to the data side, if you can't show the data, what should you do? And I know we're going to talk about that in a little bit.
Yes. So one of the things in the chat is how to describe a project, and when you just wanted to make something pretty, if it's graphic design related, that is a skill in itself. Sometimes that is the point of the project. If you look at my at least one of my submissions for the GeoHipster calendar, I just wanted to make a map, I wanted to do something fun. And that's okay because it still demonstrates skills. And so maybe you want to describe it in terms of data visualization and, making things that are appealing but still communicate well. There's ways you can tweak it to sound to hit on the more professional aspects of what you're doing, even though maybe you did just make it, in your heart to be, just because you wanted to do something fun and cool. But, what are the professional pieces of that are still important? The reason you would share it is not just because you made something pretty, but you're demonstrating a certain skill set. So I think that's important too, to think about what would a potential employer get from this? And that's also relates back to your goals too. If it really doesn't meet your goals, then don't put it on the portfolio. But if you can spin it, then figure out the it's not spin really. If you can figure out the hooks, the things that an employer would be looking for, or a colleague, for example, a lot of my portfolio is more aimed at colleagues at this point. Those are the kinds of, that's the kind of language you want to use around it. So I think it's important to talk about one of the things that we anticipated coming up, and that is strategies for when you are working with a project that either has sensitive data or has is a product that you just can't share for some reason. And that's sometimes being a good colleague actually means you're not going to share every aspect of some of the work that you're doing. So maybe you're working with personally identifiable data. I do that a lot with my work with the folks from our medical campus. I've got people's home addresses. I'm not going to publish that data. That would be completely inappropriate. Or maybe you have your papers awaiting publication, it's embargoed, you can't share it because of that. Or you're developing novel workflows, and so you can't share the workflow itself. So it could be a data issue or it could be a workflow issue. And so you want to think about like what aspects of that project should I keep private, but what aspects can I share? So depending on the situation, and again, you really want to think about what is it you want to keep private. There's not necessarily one go-to answer for this. You really need to finesse the situation you're in. So for example, maybe you just describe the project's goals and the status of the project without sharing the code or results. And I actually have that on my site. So if I scroll down to, pardon me while I scroll a lot, in my health geography section, these two projects down at the bottom are currently in progress. This particular one, the endocrine surgeons project, is in progress. We just submitted a paper. So you will notice there is no link to anything and there is no results or image that goes with this yet. I just can't share it until it's published. It's going to hopefully happen soon, but I've described the project. And I've put as much information as I'm comfortable with, including the paper that's currently been submitted, the title of it and who the authors are, but that's all I can share. But still, that would give someone a good idea of what I'm doing with this project. So if they wanted to collaborate, they would know what skill set I have with relation to that project. Same thing with the air pollution one. This is a grant that just got started. So we are seriously early days and I can't share a lot about what we're doing, but I can tell you what the title of the project is and what I'm doing. So I know the text is probably pretty small on Zoom, but like I've mentioned, I'm responsible for certain aspects of this project. So that can be a way to still share what you're doing without giving a lot of detail. And for me, I have other projects that I can share where I kind of hit on some of the same skills that I'd be using. So I've demonstrated that, but essentially one approach is to just give as much detail as you're comfortable with without sharing the things that shouldn't be shared. Another approach you might do is if your workflow is something you can share, but your data is not shareable, maybe you can run a similar analysis with example data. So maybe you can download some data that is publicly available that demonstrates the same skills. So you kind of do a little side project with similar workflow and similar code that uses input data that you can share. So people could see the whole workflow. But that obviously doesn't work if the workflow is what should be secret. Same deal with writing pseudocode or sharing a workflow diagram. Maybe you don't share all the details, but you kind of give an overview of what you're doing. Also, sometimes you might not be comfortable with claiming a project as your own, and putting it on your personal site with a lot of details, but you may be able to link to some publicly available websites or like a repository or something like that that already exists where, the team has decided to put out a certain amount of information. So those are kind of some situations you might work with. I have an example in this paragraph here about a situation where you have personally identifiable information you're working with. This happens in my world a lot where I get address data that I can't share. And if I wanted to demonstrate a similar workflow, for example, geocoding data and then doing some kind of analysis, maybe like a hotspot analysis, I can't put patient data out there for other people to see. That's completely inappropriate. I wouldn't want my information shared. So I might do a similar analysis with downloading addresses for like hospitals, or maybe you could go a completely different route and like download locations of your favorite place to shop or your favorite chain restaurant or something like that, and do a similar process with publicly available data. So you might be able to swap some things in and out and kind of work within the bounds of what can and can't be shared. So that is an option, but one easy option too is just describe it as best you can and then wait it out, because eventually that project will finish and you'll have products to share. But in the meantime, you can kind of have a placeholder where you're not sharing everything, but just enough. So hopefully that kind of helps give you some ideas. But like I mentioned, there's not really a one size fits all answer for those kinds of situations where you can't share a project fully. But those are things that you can have a discussion with your colleagues about, or if you're a graduate student, maybe talk to your PI or your major professor about how to handle that. But there are ways you can put it on your portfolio without, sharing too much, let's just say. So any other questions related to that? I think the answer mostly is get creative. All right, so I think we'll move on really quickly. I promised you would get a chance to learn how to share. Unfortunately, this is pretty straightforward, but I want to acknowledge again that sometimes this can cause a little anxiety once you've got your draft and you're ready to start sharing stuff publicly. You've got your portfolio built and you think it's ready to go, but you still might be a little reluctant. I saw someone in the chat mentioning imposter syndrome, which is a real thing. And I hear you on that. So you might want to take, again, the same way you would approach getting feedback, you might want to have a staged approach to sharing your portfolio. So maybe start small with a trusted group of friends and see how that goes and see how that feels. And then as you build up confidence in your product, then maybe share it out more widely. But ideally, you would find a way to share this pretty publicly. I would consider linking it in my CV or on my resume. I personally would do social media posts about it because that's what I'm comfortable with. Depending on your presence and how much you use that, you might consider doing social media posts. You might also link it if you have a separate website, or link it on your other professional profiles like LinkedIn, or put it in your bio for your social media accounts. You might link it in your email signature, or if you have a landing page account like Linktree or Koji or something like that, you could put it on there as well. So when people go to that, they can see the whole list of things potentially for people to learn about you. So again, just make it public and share it. It's a website, it's editable. As long as you've gone through, some feedback process and you've caught the big things, I would say you can always fix stuff. And folks will love to take a look at it. I think mostly they'll be excited to see, how you represent yourself. So we don't have a ton of time for the last section. We had planned to have a little work session, but we went a little longer than anticipated. But what I will like to do is I will stop sharing my screen. I'll go ahead and turn off the recording and thank everyone for coming. And then we can have a little candid discussion afterwards for folks who want to spend another couple minutes just chatting. So again, thank you all for coming. I hope that you've learned some things, and I hope that you've got a good plan for starting your portfolio. And if you've built out a new portfolio, I would love to see it. So feel free to email me your link. I would love to take a look. So again, thanks everyone for coming, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, I'm pleased to take a chance to fill out the survey. Just a couple minutes. Helps us continue to offer free workshops.